I used to believe the proudest moment of my life would be standing beside my only daughter on the day she finally achieved the dream her mother and I poured our souls into. But that belief shattered the moment she pushed me out of her graduation photo and told me, in front of strangers, that my presence would ruin the image. What she did not know was that I had more than $3,500,000 quietly tucked away, money her mother spent decades protecting, planning, and guarding with a purpose. If you're listening to this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from. And that day, as I stood there humiliated in my best suit, I realized the time had come to use that secret in a way she would never forget. My name is Harold Benton, and I am 64 years old. I have lived my whole life in the quieter edges of Milwaukee, working in a modest repair garage that my father once owned before me. Folks around here call me old school, and maybe that's true. My hands have been coated with engine grease since I was a teenager. My knuckles look like they were carved from the metal I've handled for decades. My clothes, except for Sundays, always smell faintly of diesel and steel. But I never once felt ashamed of the life I built with my own hands. My late wife, Mary Ann, never felt ashamed either. She used to say my hands were the most honest hands she'd ever held. We were married for 30 years, and she worked right beside me, managing the books, greeting customers, making the garage feel more like a place where people belonged than a place where broken cars went to die. Mary Ann had a warmth that softened the world around her. She could calm storms inside people without saying a word, just her presence alone. When she laughed, the whole garage seemed brighter. But life has a cruel way of testing what it gives. In late autumn of 2022, Mary Ann began having those spells, the shortness of breath, the tightness in her chest she kept brushing off as stress. The doctors said she needed surgery. Complicated, high risk, necessary. The night before the operation, she held my face in both her hands, as if memorizing it. "Harry," she said. She was the only person who ever called me that. "I've kept something from you. Not out of malice, out of protection." I frowned, confused, and she continued. "After my parents passed, and we sold the family land in rural Idaho, the inheritance wasn't what I told you. It wasn't a small sum. It was, well, over $3,500,000 once everything's settled. And I invested it quietly, carefully, for our daughter's future. I felt the earth tilt beneath me. All my life, I had worked dawn to dusk, believing every bill depended on my labor. Meanwhile, Mary Ann carried a fortune in silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked her, not angry, just stunned. Her smile? God, I think about that smile every night. Soft, wise, a little sad. Because, Harry, I wanted our daughter to grow up understanding what real work is. I wanted her to learn humility, to stay grounded. Money, if given too easily, twists people. And I needed her to grow into someone who deserved opportunity, not someone who felt entitled to it. She squeezed my hand. "If something happens to me tomorrow, promise me you won't use that money blindly. Use it only if she shows the values we try to raise her with. Otherwise, you'll do more harm than good." Those are the last fully lucid words she ever spoke to me. The surgery went wrong, drastically wrong. Complications piled on complications. And just past noon on March 15th, 2023, my world lost its center. I walked out into the dull hospital corridor a widower, with a daughter back home who adored her mother more than anything on earth. My daughter, Clara, was 27 at the time, bright, determined, studying tirelessly to become an attorney. Losing her mother broke something inside her. She withdrew. She stopped eating properly, stopped returning calls. Her ambition dimmed, and she built a wall between us that I didn't know how to climb. Then came Evan A. Man, 31, working as a coordinator for a corporate logistics office. At first, he brought her back to life. He made her laugh again. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, he planted little seeds, subtle jabs about my blue-collar background, hints that Clara needed to elevate her circle, comments that made my daughter start hiding who I was when she introduced me to her new world. But none of that compared to the day she looked me in the eyes in front of a photographer, a crowd of families, professors, and strangers, and told me I didn't belong beside her. And that was the moment the promise I made to her mother ignited inside my chest. The moment I realized our daughter had failed the most important test of character. The moment I knew I had to act. The moment everything changed. In the months following Marianne's passing, the house felt unbearably quiet. I would still catch myself setting out 2 mugs in the morning before remembering there was no one left to drink the second cup. The soft whistle she used to make while cooking, the gentle rustling of her notebook pages as she balanced the shop accounts, even her humming while folding laundry, those small sounds that once filled our home vanished, leaving an unnerving stillness behind. Clara, instead of growing closer to me in grief, drifted further away. She spent most nights at her apartment, claiming she needed space to process everything. I understood, or at least I tried to. Losing Marianne had hollowed out pieces of both of us, but where I sought connection to steady myself, Clara hid behind busy schedules and polite distance. There were days when I called and she didn't answer. Days when I left a meal on her doorstep because I knew she hadn't eaten properly. Days when I stood in my empty living room staring at the framed photograph of the 3 of us on a fishing trip at Lake Geneva, wondering how the daughter who used to climb into my lap to show me her drawings had become someone who barely let me into her life. Then, in early summer, she met Evan. At first, I was relieved. Evan seemed to bring a spark back in her eyes, something I hadn't seen since we lost Marianne. He encouraged her to finish the final stretch of her law program. He helped her out of bed when depression pinned her down. I wanted to be grateful to him. But gratitude has a strange way of turning into suspicion when someone touches your child's world too deeply. The first time Evan visited my shop, he looked around with a kind of quiet disdain he tried to hide behind a polite smile. He glanced at the oil-stained concrete floor, the racks of worn tools, the faded posters from decades ago, as though he had stepped into a relic from a world he believed himself above. "You still work full days here?" he asked me, as though it were an odd choice. "I do," I said. "Keeps the mind sharp and the bills paid." He smirked faintly. "Well, Clara has bigger horizons ahead of her now. Maybe someday she won't have to tell people her father is a mechanic." He said it casually, as if making an innocent observation, but the words dug into me like a rusted wrench. Clara didn't correct him. She laughed softly, almost nervously. And in that moment, I felt a sliver of something I never wanted to feel toward my own daughter disappointment. Over the next months, their relationship deepened, and so did Clara's transformation. She started dressing differently, high-end blazers, tailored pants, shoes that looked like they cost more than a full week of shop supplies. She stopped mentioning the garage at all, and when I asked if she wanted to join me for our old Sunday breakfast, she always had a reason: brunch with Evan's parents, meetings with classmates, networking events. Networking. That word became her new prayer. Evan's parents, Leonard and Faye, owned a line of upscale home decor stores in downtown Milwaukee. They weren't exceedingly wealthy, but they carried themselves as if they floated on a tier just above ordinary working families like mine. Whenever we crossed paths, which I tried to avoid, Leonard's smile felt like a polite mask, and Faye's compliments were wrapped in subtle pity. "Oh, Harold," she'd say, looking me up and down in my usual work clothes. "It's so admirable you're still doing hands-on labor. Truly admirable. Admired but never respected." Still, I stayed quiet. I kept my dignity. Because Clara loved them, or at least she believed she needed their approval, and I didn't want to deepen the rift between us. In December, they held a small but elegant wedding for Clara and Evan. The ceremony took place in a renovated stone chapel just outside the city. Clara looked radiant in her simple satin gown, but even in that beauty, I noticed something. When she walked down the aisle on my arm, her grip on me wasn't firm and proud, it was cautious, almost as though she hoped people wouldn't stare too closely at the man escorting her. Her mother would have noticed that instantly. When we took family photos after the ceremony, I saw how she angled herself subtly toward Evan's family, not mine. I stood in the frame, but only in the physical sense. Emotionally, I was already fading into the background. And through all of this, Clara never knew I had been quietly helping her behind the scenes. When she lost her position at a small legal office earlier that year, she told everyone she had savings to manage the transition. The truth was far different. Clara hadn't built savings. She had barely scraped by between school expenses and rent. It wasn't long before I discovered through her landlord that she was late with payments. So I stepped in, not wanting her pride to shatter, not wanting her new marriage to crumble before it even began. I arranged for $800 each month to be transferred directly to the landlord, covering half of her rent without revealing it came from me. It wasn't charity. It was what Marianne would have wanted: support, but quiet support. Support with boundaries. For nearly a year, I paid those $800 faithfully, tightening my own expenses when needed, patching my old truck myself instead of bringing it to a specialist, eating simpler meals, anything so Clara would never have to worry. But as the saying goes, love without truth becomes weakness. And weakness, when stretched far enough, eventually breaks. Because while I was spending my hard-earned dollars to keep a roof over her head, my daughter was learning to be ashamed of the very man making that possible. It all came to a painful climax the afternoon she graduated. The day she pushed me away. The day she showed me exactly how far she had wandered from her mother's teachings. The morning of Clara's graduation felt like the first hopeful sunrise I'd seen since losing Marianne. I woke before dawn, brewed a pot of dark roast the way my wife used to like it, and sat quietly at the kitchen table, letting the warmth of the cup ground me. For once, the house didn't feel quite as empty. This was Clara's day, her moment. The finish line she had clawed her way toward through years of classes, late nights, stress, and heartbreak. And though our relationship had been strained, though she had drifted from the values Marianne and I worked so hard to give her, I still felt pride blooming in my chest. I showered, shaved carefully, and put on the navy suit I kept wrapped in a garment bag for special occasions. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean, pressed, dignified. I polished the old leather shoes I'd worn to anniversaries and family holidays, and I knotted the burgundy tie Marianne gave me on our 20th wedding anniversary. Before stepping out, I paused in front of my wife's framed photograph on the hallway wall. "Marianne," I whispered, "our girl is crossing the finish line today. I wish you could see her." If I closed my eyes, I could almost imagine her beside me, smiling that subtle, proud smile she had whenever Clara accomplished something meaningful. I arrived on campus almost an hour early. A light breeze drifted across the courtyard, carrying the sound of chatter, camera shutters, and the rustling of graduation gowns. Families gathered in groups, mothers fixing their children's tassels, fathers boasting loudly to anyone who'd listen, grandparents wiping tears from their cheeks. I found a seat near the center aisle, the kind that offers a clear view of the stage. I kept a hand on the empty chair next to me, the one Clara had asked me to save for Evan and his parents. When they arrived, they greeted me with the usual thin courtesy. "Good afternoon, Harold," Leonard said, his tone politely detached. "You clean up well," Faye added, as though complimenting a dog for being freshly groomed. I ignored the sting. Today wasn't about them. The ceremony began with the usual speeches, some inspiring, some dull, all long. But the moment the dean started reading out the graduates' names, my heart thumped like a drum. Finally, he called Clara Benton, Juris Doctor. I was on my feet before anyone else. I clapped until my palms stung. I shouted, "That's my girl." And for a brief moment, Clara beamed toward me from the stage, the brightest smile I had seen from her in over a year. My throat tightened. That look, the pride, the relief was worth every sacrifice, every night of worry. When the ceremony ended, graduates flooded the lawn for photographs. Families gathered in clusters, snapping dozens of pictures from every angle. I wove through the crowd, searching for Clara. She spotted me first. "Dad," she called, waving. "Come on, let's take some photos." Hearing enthusiasm in her voice again lit something inside me. Maybe today would be a turning point. Maybe the young woman Marianne and I raised was still in there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. We walked toward a designated photo area where a hired photographer arranged groups in front of a backdrop of spring blossoms and university banners. "All right, let's get the immediate family first," the photographer instructed. I stepped forward, positioning myself at Clara's left side, exactly where a father belongs in a graduation portrait. That was when her hand rose. Not gently, not hesitantly, firmly. "Dad, wait," Maybe stand off to the side for a moment, she said. I froze. What do you mean? I asked softly. Her cheeks flushed slightly, not from pride, but from embarrassment. It's just, your suit doesn't really match the group look we're going for. Let me take the formal photos with Evan and his parents first. Then we'll get a few with you. Group look. The words hit harder than I expected, as if a family photo were a fashion spread. I was a blot on the page. Evan chuckled, placing a possessive hand on Clara's shoulder. Yeah, Harold, don't worry. We'll grab some casual shots afterward. Casual, a word people use for what they don't care enough to elevate. Leonard added, come now, son. This is an important moment for Clara's career image. We want the photos she shares publicly to reflect, well, the right circles. The right circles. As though I were the wrong one. Nearby families slowed down, unwilling witnesses to the crack forming right in the center of my chest. The photographer shifted awkwardly, glancing at me with sympathetic eyes. Sir, you're welcome to stand right over there for a minute until we finish this set. He gestured gently toward a bench a few yards away. A bench. I felt the distance between that bench and my daughter like a canyon. Still, I stepped back slowly, giving a small nod anything to avoid making a scene on her big day. From the bench, I watched them pose, Clara in the middle, radiant. Evan beside her, beaming. Leonard and Faye standing tall behind them, framed perfectly like a polished family portrait. Clara laughed freely with them, relaxed and glowing. They looked like a magazine advertisement for the life she wanted. A life with no place for me. Picture after picture, pose after pose, retakes, angled shots, solo shots, shots with professors, shots with classmates. Nearly half an hour passed while I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, my heart sinking into the pit of my stomach. Then, finally, Clara waved me over. Okay, Dad, she said with a thin, rehearsed smile. Let's get a few shots together. A few. Not many. Not important ones. She stood beside me, stiff as a board, leaving a small gap of empty air between us. The photographer did his job, but even he sensed the force behind her smile wasn't joy, it was obligation. When we finished, she said, without looking me fully in the eyes, Dad, thank you for coming. It means a lot. But Evan's parents made a reservation at the Imperial Hearth downtown. It's a high-end place with limited seating, and they only booked for 4 people, so there's no room for me. I finished gently. She winced as though the truth stung her. It's not that. It's a very formal environment, and you might feel out of place. I nodded slowly. Out of place. That was the polite version of what she meant. The real version was, you don't fit the image I want to project. And that right, there was the moment my heart stopped protecting her from the truth. That was the moment I felt Mary Ann's words echo in my soul. Money without values only creates monsters. And for the first time, I feared our daughter had become one. I watched their sleek, silver luxury sedan pull away from the campus, Evan driving, Leonard in the passenger seat, Faye smoothing her dress, and Clara seated in the back, glowing with anticipation for a celebration I was not welcome at. The taillights flickered as they turned the corner toward the main avenue, disappearing into the early evening traffic. And just like that, the courtyard emptied around me, leaving me standing alone beneath rows of fluttering graduation banners, bright, proud symbols of a future I no longer felt part of. Families everywhere were still laughing, hugging, taking pictures. The energy was joyful, alive. Meanwhile, I walked slowly to my old pickup truck, a 15-year-old red Chevy with a dented rear bumper and paint worn down from Wisconsin winters. A truck that had carried Clara's science fair projects, soccer gear, moving boxes, and once her mother's wheelchair. As I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripped the steering wheel, not with anger, but with a steady, growing resolve. I turned on the engine. The familiar rumble calmed me, like a heartbeat sinking to mine. But the ache in my chest didn't ease. On the drive home, memories of Clara's childhood drifted through my mind like a montage. Clara standing on a wooden chair beside me, handing me screwdrivers while I worked under the hood. Clara waving her spelling bee ribbon, giggling that she might buy the whole world when she became a lawyer. Clara crying at 7 years old when a classmate mocked her for smelling like garage oil because she hugged me after work and Marianne wiping her tears, telling her, "Your daddy's work smells like love." Where had that little girl gone? When I pulled into my driveway, twilight had settled. The sky was a blend of purples and deep blue, like bruises on a healing body. I walked inside, the air stale with silence. On the shelf near the entryway sat a framed photograph of Marianne, her smile soft, her eyes bright with that patient wisdom I had relied on so many times. I picked it up and whispered, "She pushed me out, Marianne. Out of the photo, out of her life, out of the image she thinks she needs. What do I do now? How do I reach a daughter who no longer sees me as someone worth standing beside?" The house answered only with stillness. But Marianne's final words rose in my mind, not as a memory, but like a guiding voice. "Use the money only if she proves she deserves it, and do not give her a dime if she does not." I sat heavily on the couch, the weight of those words settling deeper and deeper. Then something shifted. For the first time since her death, I truly understood what Marianne had meant. She wasn't talking about punishing Clara. She was talking about protecting her from herself. Love isn't enabling disrespect. Love isn't shielding someone from consequences. Love, real love, sometimes means stepping back and letting a person face the mirror. I stood, walked into the small office at the end of the hall, and unlocked the drawer where I kept important documents. Inside was a file containing all of Marianne's financial paperwork, the accounts, the investments, the inheritance she had grown so meticulously. Over $3,500,000. Enough to change Clara's life forever. Enough to grant her every opportunity she dreamed of. But money in the hands of someone who lacks gratitude, humility, or respect becomes poison. I looked at the bank statements until the numbers blurred, then glanced at the wall clock. 7 o'clock. My closest friend, Samuel Reyes, a lawyer who had known Marianne since college, would still be in his office downtown. Sam was present at our wedding, at Clara's baptism, and at Marianne's funeral. He was one of the few people who understood the depth of my wife's character and the weight of the promise she had made me swear to uphold. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. "Harry? Everything all right?" "No," I said quietly. "I need your help. Tonight." There was a pause on his end, one of those perceptive pauses Sam was known for. "Come to the office," he said finally. "I'll wait for you." I grabbed the keys, locked up, and drove through dimming streets. Streetlights flickered on one by one, illuminating patches of pavement like stepping stones, guiding me toward a decision I wasn't sure I wanted to make, but knew I needed to. When I arrived at Sam's building, a refurbished brick structure near the river, he was already waiting at the door. "Harry," he said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You look like you've been hit by a freight train." "I think I have," I replied. We walked up to his office, where he motioned for me to sit while he flicked on a desk lamp. Warm yellow light spread across his cluttered desk, filled with law books, files, and that old ceramic mug he refused to replace. "Tell me what happened." And so I did. All of it. The humiliation at the graduation photos. The comments from Evan and his parents. Clara's attempt to hide me from view. The exclusion from the dinner. And the ache of watching my daughter choose image over love. Sam listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a pad, his brow knit with concern. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Harry," he said slowly, "I know how much this hurts. But tell me, what is it you want to do?" I took a deep breath. I want to send Clara the clearest message she has ever received. Not with anger, with reality. I want her to understand the weight of her choices. And I think the best way to do that is to stop shielding her. Stop quietly paying her rent. Stop preserving the illusion she's financially stable. I hesitated before adding, "And, Sam, I want to buy the house she lives in." Sam didn't look surprised. In fact, he nodded knowingly. "You want her to face the consequences. Not out of revenge, but out of love." "Exactly," I said quietly. "If she's going to learn the value of family, respect, and humility, she needs the shock that forces her to look inward. Because talking hasn't worked." Sam folded his hands. "It's bold, Harry, but effective. Painful, yes, but effective." He turned to the filing cabinet, pulled out a folder of real estate contacts, and opened it. We'll start tonight. And in that dim office, surrounded by legal pads and old case files, the decision took root. The kind of decision that changes everything. Sam opened a fresh legal pad, the tip of his pen tapping lightly as he shifted into professional mode. "Harry," he said, "before we take any steps, we need to identify who owns the property Clara is living in. If the owner is willing to sell, and especially if they're older or planning to relocate, we can move quickly. Your ability to pay outright gives you a tremendous advantage." I nodded. "I'm prepared, whatever it costs." Sam gave me a look that blended admiration and sorrow. "You're a better father than you realize." He typed for a moment, pulling up property records from the county database. After a few seconds, he said, "Here we are. The house Clara and Evan rent is owned by a 74-year-old widow named Mrs. Randall. She inherited the house from her late husband." And he clicked through a few notes. "Looks like she's been considering moving to Colorado to live with her son." My heart gave a small jolt. "So she might sell?" "More than might," Sam said. "If we offer cash and a quick closing, she'll probably think it's heaven sent." He made 2 calls. The second one reached her directly. I listened quietly as Sam said, "Mrs. Randall, I represent a client interested in purchasing your property." "Yes," quickly. "Yes, for a competitive all-cash offer." "That's right. No financing contingencies." He paused, glanced at me, then mouthed the words, "She's very interested." After another minute, he hung up and turned to face me fully. "She said yes, Harry. She'll meet tomorrow morning. If all goes smoothly, we could close in as little as 3 or 4 days." 3 or 4 days. The idea that by midweek I could legally own the house my daughter believed she lived in independently, it was surreal. Heavy, but necessary. Sam handed me the paperwork to sign preliminary authorizations. "This is a powerful move," he said, "and the emotional impact on Clara will be equally powerful. Make sure you're prepared for that." I looked down at the documents. My signature had always been steady, but tonight my hand trembled just slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice. "I'm ready," I said, and I signed. When I left Sam's office that night, the cool air hit me like a splash of water. The city lights reflected on the river, shimmering like a long strip of broken glass. I drove home in near silence, gripping the wheel as I replayed every humiliation from the graduation day. Every time Clara flinched at my presence. Every time Eva made a joke about my work. Every time Leonard and Faye looked at me as though I had tracked mud into their perfect world. And the final sting, Clara telling me I wouldn't fit in the imperial hearth. She didn't know it, but that comment cut deeper than anything else. Because Marianne and I raised our daughter to believe dignity came from kindness, not clothing. From humility, not status. From compassion, not material success. The fact she had forgotten those lessons meant I had failed somewhere. Or maybe the world had simply tugged her too far from her roots, and now it was time to pull her back. By mid-morning the next day, Sam called. "It's done, Harry. Mrs. Randall accepted the offer, $300,000 in cash, with an additional relocation stipend. She'll sign everything this afternoon. The property will be legally yours by Wednesday. $300,000. A small fraction of the inheritance, yet a monumental shift in the landscape of our family." I spent the next 2 days working in the shop, trying to keep my mind occupied. I repaired a Dodge with a stubborn overheating issue. I replaced brake pads on an old Subaru. I welded a cracked muffler pipe for a high school kid saving money for college. The ordinary work steadied me, but beneath the rhythm of tools and engines, the tension grew. Wednesday arrived. The paperwork was finalized at precisely 11 o'clock in the morning. At noon, the property management company delivered the official notification to Clara and Evan. The house had been sold. The new owner intended to reclaim the property. They had 30 days to vacate. I continued working in the shop, wiping grease from my hands when my phone buzzed. Clara's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. A second time. A third. By the 6th call, I answered. Her voice came through strained, shaky, unfamiliar. Dad, I just got a notice. The house is sold. The new owner wants us out in 30 days. The letter says the buyer is someone named Harold Benton. She practically whispered my name, as if it were the last one she expected to see. Yes, I said simply. That's me. Dad, how? How could you afford this? You're a mechanic. There was again that assumption. That narrow lens she used to see my entire worth. There are things about my financial situation you don't know, I said. And not the point right now. Not the point. Her voice rose with panic. We don't have savings for a move. We don't have time to find a similar place. Why would you do this? Clara, I said softly. I think you already know why. A long silence followed. I could hear her shaky breathing. Is this about the graduation? She finally asked. It's about more than that, I answered. It's about months, years of choices. It's about how you've treated me, how you've allowed others to treat me, how you've forgotten the values your mother gave you. Another silence. Heavier this time. Dad, please can we talk? Really talk. We will, I said, but not to undo the consequences. The clock on the 30 days isn't changing. Her voice cracked. Dad, I don't know what to do. You'll figure it out, I replied gently. You and Evan both. She didn't answer. She just cried, quietly, brokenly. And as much as the sound pierced me, I did not take the decision back. Because sometimes the most painful things are the only things that teach us what we refuse to learn any other way. The next call came from Evan. Harold, this is absurd, he barked. You can't throw out your own daughter. I'm not throwing her anywhere, I replied calmly. I'm reclaiming a property I own. You did this out of spite. No, I said. Out of clarity. Evan scoffed. We can't find another place in 30 days. You should have considered that before depending quietly on others while disrespecting them openly. He cursed under his breath, and I ended the call, because nothing more needed to be said. The fuse had been lit, and the lesson had begun. By late afternoon, after Evan's sputtering and half-coherent accusations, I thought the storm of phone calls might finally be over. I was wrong. My phone rang again, this time with the name Leonard Whitford flashing across the screen. Evan's father, a man who could make arrogance sound like courtesy. I answered, already bracing myself. Harold, he began in a tone meant to sound serious and commanding. We need to discuss this house situation. Immediately, man to man, I wiped my hands on an old shop rag and leaned against the workbench. Go ahead, I said. Speak your mind. This whole thing is unacceptable, he said. A parent simply does not evict his own daughter over what appears to be a misunderstanding at a graduation event. A misunderstanding, that was their word for it. Polished. Convenient. Wrong. There was no misunderstanding, I replied. There was clarity. She made her choices. Now she's meeting them face to face. Leonard exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. Look, Harold, I understand you were hurt, but reacting impulsively, emotionally especially at your age, is dangerous. You're making decisions like a man driven by wounded pride, not reason. That one caught me. My age. The implication that old men become irrational. Foolish. If only he knew how carefully, painfully this decision had been considered. Leonard, I said, I didn't buy the house impulsively. I did it deliberately and legally. But why, Harold? What possible justification do you have for throwing them out? Consequences, I said plainly. For disrespect. For pride. For letting image matter more than family. He scoffed an ugly, dismissive sound. Image matters, Harold. Appearance matters. Connections matter. That's the real world, not whatever sentimental lessons you think you're teaching. There it was. His truth. The doctrine he had fed into my daughter for months. No, I replied firmly. Character matters. Gratitude matters. Humility matters. And if those values were stronger in your household, maybe they would be stronger in my daughter's marriage. The line went silent for a few seconds. Then, so this is about money, he said. You want recognition? You want to show you're not as poor or helpless as you seem. I laughed softly, without humor. If I wanted recognition, Leonard, I wouldn't have been secretly paying half their rent for over a year. Another long silence. You what? He asked, voice dropping. For over a year, I repeated. $800 every month. Quietly, without asking for thanks, without demanding respect. And while I helped them survive, you and your wife paraded around pretending your financial support was unnecessary, because you were teaching independence. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his mind, shock, mixed with embarrassment. That cannot be true, he muttered. You can ask your son, I replied, though he probably won't enjoy admitting how much of their comfortable lifestyle depended on a man he mocks for smelling like motor oil. Leonard didn't speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice had lost some of its shiny superiority. Well, regardless of what we didn't know, he said slowly, evicting them is extreme. It will cause real hardship. Good, I answered quietly. What do you mean good? It means the lesson will be real. And maybe, just maybe, it will stick. Leonard's tone sharpened again, but this time the edge was thinner, wobbling. Harold, listen to reason. Let's meet. Discuss this face to face. Work out a compromise. There is no compromise, I said. The 30-day notice stands. What would you need from Clara to reconsider? An apology? A conversation? Some acknowledgement of her poor behavior? I don't need anything said out of desperation, I replied. Any apology bought by fear is worthless. She will learn what she chooses to learn. The rest is out of my hands. You're being stubborn, he snapped. And vindictive. No, I said calmly. I'm being a father. He didn't like that answer. Not one bit. I'll tell Faye, he said, sounding almost defeated. But this will devastate her. Then perhaps it will open her eyes too. You don't understand, Leonard continued. Our family is going to look terrible. People will question why your daughter is being displaced by her own father-in-law. No, I corrected him. They will question why a man who pretends to be wealthy allowed another man, a mechanic, to subsidize his son's lifestyle. He was silent again, completely silent. For a moment, I thought he might hang up, but instead, he said very quietly, Harold, I admit we may have misjudged you. You didn't misjudge me, I replied. You judged the dirt under my fingernails. You judged the grease on my clothes. You judged a life you've never lived and never respected. The silence stretched on. When he spoke again, the arrogance had drained out of his voice. What happens now? Now, I said gently, your son and my daughter begin the part of adulthood. No one likes living with the consequences of how they treat people. He exhaled shakily. And the property? He asked. I'll be repurposing it. The tenants have 30 days. After that, it is no longer their home. There was a thick, heavy pause. You know, Leonard said softly, Clara isn't a bad young woman. She's just misguided. I know, I replied. That's why I'm doing this. To help her find her way back. Even if it breaks her heart. Sometimes, I said, a broken heart is the only doorway to a wiser one. Leonard didn't answer. He hung up without saying goodbye. Not 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Clara. Her voice was different. Softer. Smaller. Frightened. Dad, can we talk? Not to argue. Not to beg. I just want to understand. And something in me, something deep, knew the real turning point was approaching. Not punishment. Not anger. Not revenge. Rebuilding. But only after everything fell apart. When I answered Clara's call, I expected panic. Or anger. Or frantic bargaining driven by Evan's furious whispering in the background. What I heard instead was something far more painful. A trembling voice, trying and failing to stay steady. Dad, she said, I've been sitting on the floor for almost an hour just staring at that notice. I don't even know how to process it. Everything feels like it's collapsing. I leaned back against the workbench, the shop lights humming above me. Take your time, I said gently. Tell me what you're feeling. There was a quiet sniffle, then another. I feel ashamed, she whispered. That surprised me, not because she shouldn't feel that way, but because it was the first honest thing she had said to me in a very long time. Why ashamed? I asked softly. Because I've been pretending I'm independent. Pretending Evan and I built something stable. Pretending I didn't need anyone. But now I learn I've been living in a house you essentially kept afloat. I didn't respond. I wanted her to keep talking. And worse, she continued, while you were helping me, I was letting other people talk down to you. I was letting myself talk down to you. Her voice cracked completely. Dad, I'm so sorry. I closed my eyes. Those words, spoken not from desperation, but from realization, warmed something inside me that I thought had gone cold. But a single apology doesn't fix what's been broken for months. It's only the beginning. Clara, I said quietly, I'm listening, but I need to know something. Is this apology born out of losing the house or out of seeing what you've become? There was a long silence, so long I wondered whether she would hang up. But then she spoke again, voice raw. I think it's both. And I hate that. I hate that it took something this dramatic for me to open my eyes. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. That's how learning works sometimes, I said. We resist the truth until life gives us no more room to hide from it. She asked if she could come to the shop. Not to argue, not to negotiate, just to talk. I agreed. Half an hour later, she walked through the garage door wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweatshirt instead of her usual polished outfits. Her eyes were swollen, mascara smudged not in the dramatic way, but in the painfully human way grief and guilt tended to show themselves. She looked like the girl who used to sit on the counter swinging her legs while I worked, asking endless questions about tools. She walked toward me slowly, almost cautiously. "Dad," she murmured, and for the first time in many months, she hugged me. Not a polite, quick embrace, not the stiff, distant hug she'd grown accustomed to giving. A real one, her arms wrapped tightly around me, her face pressed against my chest, trembling. "Dad, I messed up," she whispered. "I messed up so badly." I put a hand on her back, steadying her. "Sit down," I said. "Let's talk." We sat on two old stools by the workbench, the same spot where I once taught her how to replace a spark plug. Clara wiped her cheeks with a tissue. "Dad," she began, "I want to explain what happened at the graduation. Not to justify it, but to tell you the truth." "Go ahead," I said. She inhaled shakily. "I was embarrassed. Not of you as a person. Never that. But embarrassed of what other people would think. The classmates. The professors. Evan's parents. His friends." She looked away, ashamed. "And I hate myself for it." I nodded slowly. Why did their opinions matter so much? Because I was grieving, Dad, and lost. And when Mom died, it felt like the ground fell out from under me. Evan came into my life, saying everything I wanted to hear, telling me I deserved better, deserved more, deserved a different world. "You listened to him," I said gently. "I clung to him," she corrected. "I let him shape how I saw myself. And how I saw you." That admission alone was a seismic shift. She took another breath. "Dad, you've always been my rock. Even when you weren't talking much. Even when I pulled away. You were still the constant. And I think that scared me." "Scared you?" "Yes. Because loving you meant remembering Mom. And remembering Mom hurt." My chest tightened at that. "So, instead of staying close," she continued, "I drifted. And then that drift became distance. And then distance became disrespect." She covered her face with her hands. "I'm so ashamed. I let the silence sit between us for a while. Sometimes silence is the only true witness to pain." When she finally looked up, her voice was steadier. "I'm not asking you to change the 30 days, she said quietly. "I know I need to deal with the consequences. And Evan keeps telling me to beg you, really beg you, but I won't. I won't because I know I hurt you. And I know Mom would be disappointed in how I acted." There it was. Not the daughter influenced by Evan, or shaped by appearances, or chasing an image, but the daughter Marianne and I raised. Thoughtful, repentant, humane. "Clara," I said, "I'm proud of you for saying these things. Not because I want or deserve an apology, but because you finally see the truth." She nodded. "And Dad, I want you to know something else." "What is it?" She swallowed hard. "I'm starting to see who Evan really is. And I don't like it. I don't like the way he talks about you, or the way he talks about work, or the way he treats people who can't give him something." A dark realization flickered in her eyes. "And I don't like who I became around him." That was new, unexpected, important. "What do you want to do about that?" I asked gently. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I know something has to change." We spoke for nearly an hour about her job search, her fears, her lost sense of identity, the pressure she felt to impress Evan's parents, the way she drifted from the values her mother taught her. And then she said something I'll never forget. "Dad, I know this is going to be painful. Moving, starting over, maybe even rethinking my marriage. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm waking up." A quiet warmth spread through my chest. "It took a shock," I said softly. "Yes," she whispered. but maybe it was the shock I needed. She stood and hugged me again longer this time, steadier. I'm going to try to fix this, she said. Not with words, with who I become. I nodded. That's all I ever wanted, Clara. As she walked to her car, wiping the last of her tears, I realized something. The consequences had begun their work. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. Sometimes a heart must break before it remembers how to open. And Clara's heart, my daughter's heart, was opening again. The 30 days that followed were some of the most revealing days of my life, not just for Clara, but for me as well. When consequences finally settled over her home like a gray cloud, every person involved reacted in ways that exposed who they truly were. And truth, once exposed, cannot be covered again. Evan's reaction was entirely predictable. He blamed Clara, not indirectly, not subtly, blatantly. If you had handled your father better, he snapped at her one afternoon while she sat quietly in my shop helping organize old invoices, none of this would be happening. I overheard him because Clara had put the call on speaker while she searched for a receipt from years ago. The tone of his voice made my blood cool. Handle me better, I repeated under my breath, shaking my head. Clara muted the phone for a moment and whispered, Dad, don't react. Please, let me deal with this. She unmuted him. Evan, she said, surprisingly firm, this isn't about handling anyone. This is about my behavior. Well, stop it, Evan scoffed. Your dad is acting irrationally, emotionally. He's punishing us for something minor. You're letting him. Evan, Clara said quietly, pushing my own father out of my graduation photos wasn't minor. That's subjective, he snapped. Besides, now we're paying the price. My parents are humiliated. They think your father is unstable. I almost laughed at the irony. The Whitfords embarrassed? They had lived their entire lives in the shallow pool of appearances. Of course, this would shake their carefully polished image. But I held my tongue. This wasn't the moment for me to intervene. Clara ended the conversation by calmly turning off her phone. She sat beside me, breathing slowly through what looked like a storm raging behind her eyes. That's how he's been talking to me for days, she finally whispered. And how does it make you feel? I asked. She paused for a long time. Like I've been asleep for a very long time, she said. And I'm just now waking up. Clara began spending more time at my shop. Not to escape Evan, though, I suspected that was part of it, but because she finally recognized the value in simplicity. She helped me with paperwork, swept the shop, organized drawers, even fetched tools like she used to when she was young. One afternoon, she held a wrench in her hand and said, You know, this feels grounding. Real. I smiled faintly. Greece has a way of bringing people back to earth. She laughed soft and genuine. Then she added, I'm thinking of applying to firms that work with labor rights. Real people, real struggles. I think Mom would have liked that. She would have loved it, I told her. Clara's smile faltered for a moment. I've been avoiding thinking about her, she admitted. Every time I tried, it hurt too much. Maybe I push you away because you remind me of her. That confession struck deep, like a blade wrapped in compassion. And now, I asked softly, now I want to remember her again. All of her. The way she smiled at your jokes. The way she looked at you when she thought no one was watching. The values she lived by. Her voice quivered. I want to be her daughter again, Dad. I placed a hand on hers. You never stopped being her daughter. You just lost sight of the path for a while. The tension in Clara's marriage worsened. Evan resented every moment she spent with me. He resented every moment she spent reflecting on herself. Most of all, he resented that the situation forced him to acknowledge the financial fragility he had hidden behind expensive dinners and luxury brand shirts. Clara told me he had thrown a fit when she suggested they downsize to a more modest apartment. I'm not living like a poor person, he snapped. My parents will not accept that. Clara looked exhausted when she recounted the story to me. Dad, she said, what did I not see this before? Sometimes love or the idea of love makes us blind, I replied. Do you think it's too late for us? She asked. For your marriage? I clarified. Or for you? She thought for a moment. For both. For you? No, not even close, I said. For your marriage, that depends on whether Evan can grow. And whether he wants to. She sighed deeply. I don't think he wants to. And in that moment, I saw the first unmistakable sign that her life with Evan was tilting toward collapse. On the 28th day, Clara walked into the shop holding a folded notice her new lease for a smaller apartment in a quieter suburb. "It's not glamorous," she said, "but it's ours, and we can afford it without anyone's help." I smiled. "Proud of you," I said. "Truly." "Evan hates it," she added. "He won't stop complaining. Says it's embarrassing." "And how do you feel?" I asked. She looked thoughtful, relieved, like I finally stopped pretending, like I'm finally being honest with myself. Then quietly she said, "I think we're growing apart, Dad. And not because of you. Because I'm changing and he refuses to." I nodded. Growth doesn't always happen in pairs. She hugged me again, a long, warm embrace filled with gratitude. "Thank you for not giving in," she whispered. "Thank you for letting this be hard. I needed it." And in that moment, everything Marianne had ever feared, hoped, and prayed for in Clara came full circle. Clara had rediscovered herself, not through money, not through shelter, not through comfort, through truth. On the 30th day, Clara and Evan officially moved out of the house I now owned. Evan barely looked at me, his jaw tight, his pride bruised beyond repair. Clara, however, approached me quietly before getting into her car. "Dad, I'm ready to rebuild things. Not just my life. Us." I squeezed her shoulder. "So am I said. And as the moving truck pulled away, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, grounded hope. 6 months passed after that final day, the day Clara left the house I now owned. The day her life pivoted sharply away from the polished illusions she once clung to. And those 6 months taught me something profound. Sometimes life cracks a person open not to break them, but to reveal who they were always meant to be. Clara's new apartment wasn't grand, not by her old standards. It was a modest two-bedroom place in a quiet suburb lined with maple trees and small community parks. The living room was cozy, the kitchen compact, and the walls still carried the faint scent of fresh paint. But unlike the place she had shared with Evan, this home didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. It was honest, grounded, just like the young woman she was becoming. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes, she showed me a small framed photo she had placed on her dining table, an old picture of her, Marianne, and me at a county fair when she was maybe 9 years old. We were covered in powdered sugar from funnel cakes, all smiling like the world was perfect. "Mom always said happiness didn't need glamour," Clara murmured. "I think I'm finally beginning to understand what she meant." I rested a hand on her shoulder. "She'd be proud of you, more than you know." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening. Her job at the labor rights firm changed her. Every day, she worked with mechanics, welders, janitors, bus drivers, workers whose struggles mirrored mine. And instead of seeing them through a lens of pity or condescension, she saw them with respect. One evening over dinner, she told me about a case involving a factory worker who had been wrongfully dismissed. "You should see the pride in these workers' eyes when they talk about what they do," she said. "They don't get praised enough. They build everything in this country. They deserve better." The conviction in her voice felt like a long-awaited healing. "You remind me of your mother," I told her. She smiled, wiping away a tear. "I've been visiting her grave," she said quietly, "every week, talking to her, telling her about everything I'm learning." My throat tightened. "And what do you tell her?" I asked. "That I'm trying to be the daughter she raised," she whispered, "and that I finally understand why she wanted me to grow up grounded." I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "She hears you, Clara. She always did." Meanwhile, the cracks in Clara's marriage widened into fractures too deep to mend. Evan resented the move, resented the smaller apartment, resented her new circle of coworkers, resented her increasing independence. He blamed me for everything from the financial strain to the arguments in their home. But the truth was simpler. Their marriage had been built on a foundation of insecurity and ambition, not values. One September afternoon, Clara arrived at my shop with swollen eyes but a strangely calm demeanor. "Dad," she said, "I'm leaving him." I set down the wrench in my hand. "Tell me." "He doesn't want to grow," she said. "Doesn't want to reflect. Doesn't want to take responsibility for anything. He says I'm changing too much." but I think I'm just becoming myself again. What made you realize it fully? I asked. She hesitated, then said, he told me he wished he'd married someone whose family wasn't so embarrassing, and that he was tired of pretending to respect you. The words hit like a hammer, but I kept my expression calm. And how did you respond? I asked. I told him that I'm tired of pretending too, she said. And I refuse to be with someone who mocks the man who sacrificed everything for me. Pride swelled in my chest, not the arrogant kind, but the grounded pride of seeing someone reclaim their soul. You did the right thing, I told her. He doesn't think so, she muttered. He doesn't get it defined right, I said gently. You do. Evan moved back in with his parents shortly afterward, dragging his resentment and excuses with him. The Whitfords never contacted me again, which suited me just fine. As autumn deepened and leaves scattered across Milwaukee like burnt orange confetti, Clara and I rebuilt our connection piece by piece. We started having dinner together every few weeks. Sometimes we cooked at my house, sometimes at her apartment. Sometimes we simply talked for hours in the shop after closing time. Conversations flowed more honestly than they ever had before. One evening, while reorganizing bolts and screws in carefully labeled jars, Clara asked, Dad, do you think Mom would forgive me for everything I did? I paused and said, she wouldn't just forgive you, she'd embrace you. Your mistakes didn't define you. What defines you is what you're doing now. Clara wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Thank you, she whispered. I needed to hear that. Then, one chilly November morning, Clara walked into the shop holding 2 coffees and wearing an expression both nervous and hopeful. Dad, she began, can you teach me some basic car maintenance? I blinked, surprised. You want to learn mechanics? I asked. She laughed softly. No, not professionally, but I want to understand the work you've done my whole life. I want to appreciate it, really appreciate it. My chest tightened in the best way. All right, I said. Come here. Let's start with checking the oil. She rolled up her sleeves and joined me under the hood of a compact sedan. Watching her wipe grease from her fingers, study the parts, and nod thoughtfully as she absorbed every lesson, it was like seeing a piece of Marianne's spirit return to life. There's something peaceful about this, she said. Something honest. That's because machines don't lie, I said. People complicate things. Engines don't. She smiled. Mom used to say your work was your way of loving people, fixing problems, keeping them safe on the road. She was right, I murmured. She was right about almost everything. A few sessions later, while tightening lug nuts on a tire, Clara paused and asked, Dad, when do you think I'll be ready to talk about the money Mom left? Not because I want anything from it. I just want to understand what she hoped for me. Her voice was sincere, free from entitlement. I wiped my hands and said, we'll talk about it when the time is right. When you no longer ask from fear or need, but from purpose. She nodded slowly. I think I'm getting there, she said softly. Not yet, but close. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. One evening, shortly before Thanksgiving, Claire and I sat outside the shop watching the sunset bleed over the horizon, golden and warm. She leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was young. Dad, she whispered, thank you for what you did. I know it hurt. I know it was hard. But without it, I don't think I would have found myself again. I wrapped an arm around her. You found yourself, I said. All I did was stop protecting you from the lessons you needed. She exhaled softly, peacefully. I'm grateful, she said. And in that moment, I knew. The painful decision I made, the house, the eviction, the silence, the boundaries, the consequences, they were all worth it. Not because they broke her, but because they helped her rebuild. 6 months after the day everything broke, I found myself sitting alone in my shop at closing time, staring at the fading orange light drifting across the grease-speckled floor. It painted the room in the same warm glow Marian used to love, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't make me ache, it made me grateful. Clara arrived just as I turned off the compressor. She stepped inside with that gentle smile she had slowly relearned, the one she used to wear when she walked home from school carrying her mother's homemade lunches. Dad, she said softly, can we talk for a moment? Of course, I replied, pulling up a stool. She sat across from me, twisting her fingers together the way she did when she was nervous. "I've been thinking about everything," she began. "About Mom, about you, about the last few months. And I want you to know something important." I waited. "You didn't just teach me a lesson," she said. "You saved me. From myself. From who I could have become." She looked around the shop, the wrenches, the old toolboxes, the shelves lined with parts organized by habit rather than need. "For a long while, I thought the world was measured by status," she continued. "By who looked successful. But working with real people, helping them fight for fairness. I feel Mom in those moments. I feel her values. In yours." A warm ache filled my chest. "Clara," I said gently, "you have become someone I am proud of every single day." She blinked rapidly to keep tears from spilling. "There's one more thing," she whispered. "I want to build my life with purpose now. Not image, not appearance. And I want you to be part of that journey. Not in the background. Not as someone I tidy away when the world is watching. As my father, the man who raised me, the man Mom adored." Her voice shook. "The man I am finally learning to honor." I couldn't speak for a moment. Pride swelled in me, quiet, steady, the kind that doesn't need applause. After a while, she took a deep breath and said, "And when you think I'm ready, when you believe I've truly earned the responsibility, I like to talk about whatever Mom left behind. Not as money, not as opportunity, but as the legacy she entrusted to us both." I nodded slowly. "When the time is right," I said, "we will open that chapter together." She smiled a genuine, unguarded smile and leaned over to hug me. I held her tightly, feeling a peace I hadn't felt since before Marianne passed. As she let go, she whispered, "I love you, Dad. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall and to help me rise again." I watched her leave the shop, her silhouette framed in the soft November dusk. And as the door closed, I felt Marianne's presence in the quiet air, not as sorrow, but as blessing. Some lessons hurt, some lessons scar, but the lessons born from love the firm, steady kind shape the people we become. In the end, the house wasn't the punishment. The house was the mirror, and my daughter finally saw herself clearly. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. And if you want to hear another powerful, true story, click the box on the left. Thanks for listening.